Hello and welcome to Executive Tech Talks, the show where we talk to executives about their technology tribulations and triumphs. Thanks for tuning in. Before we begin, our sincerest thanks to this episode's exclusive sponsor. And now, here's your host, Johna Johnson, who will introduce today's guest.
Hello, everybody. I'm Johna Johnson, and I am delighted to be here with Allison Gorman Nachtigal. Allison is the Managing Director for the Cloud Center of Excellence at Morgan Stanley, and we are here today to talk about everybody's favorite topic, cloud migration. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. So we're going to first go ahead and get started. I know we've talked several times about cloud migration and your thoughts on it, Allison. But one of the key things that you've always stressed when you're talking to me is that it's really important to align your cloud migration efforts with your cloud strategy. So what are some examples of cloud strategies that financial services firms might have?
Great question. So the very first thing to consider when you're thinking about that strategy is it really needs to be aligned with your business's strategy. What are your business goals? What are your business objectives? Some companies are optimizing for cost and trying to manage the size of their tech departments, might have a small tech department in the first place and are looking for a cloud provider to really help them supplement or augment a staff that they don't have enough capital to invest in. Other companies, typically when you're in a larger enterprise, could be looking for modernization, access to innovation, a way to move more quickly so that their applications can be launched, a way to implement DevOps and agile practices that their legacy environments might not actually support. So, and honestly, there's usually multiple things at play, and it's almost always around cost somewhere in the mix. But a key thing to do is figure out, is cost your primary driver, a secondary driver, and kind of work from there. And that will actually really shape your adoption plans, your migrations, and your overall stance.
Which makes a whole lot of sense. I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball and ask, how can the technology people get a consistent answer as to what the business strategy really wants when they talk about moving to cloud? Any tips on succeeding there?
Well, I haven't actually discovered telepathy, and so therefore it does take some time. Look, the size of the organization and the shape are really going to influence that question, but typically the people driving cloud migrations are on the infrastructure departments. Typically the people closest to the business are in your development teams. So one of the first things that I know I had to do was really reshape existing relationships with developers, but actually, instead of just going to them in a kind of customer request response fashion, approach them as a partner and really dig into what the business was trying to accomplish. Were they trying to save money? Were they trying to change process? Were they happy with the application stack? Did they want a reduction? That's key, and you just have to get deeper into that discussion right from the start so that you stay on track.
I'm glad you said that, because a lot of our clients tend to not either assume they know the answer and assume wrong, or not get a consistent answer from the business because the business wants, unicorn and rainbows and, and impossibilities. And I like the idea of talking to the developers, because they're probably closer to the business when it comes to cloud. Well, what are some of the decisions that, knowing that strategy, let's say somebody's done what you've said, got the strategy from the developers and validated it with the business, what are some of the decisions that strategy would affect when moving to cloud?
So I guess I'll take it from a what-if perspective. So if your business says that we need to, let's say, optimize for cost, let's say that you've grown up and you exist in a multitude of data centers, and a data center consolidation is a portion of a strategy, as well as cloud adoption, whether that's a hybrid approach where you're consolidating and adopting, or maybe you're deciding that you're going to use the migration to the cloud as a data center exit. Some companies do that. Again, depending on the size, and I think small to mid-sized companies that's more practical for than the larger ones. If that's what you're going for, then you're probably going to be up against a clock. And if you're up against that clock, you're going to need to really think about how can I lift and shift some of those applications, making sure that I can use an infrastructure as a service, but at the same time modernize sufficiently that I don't end up with a terrible sticker shock bill, because running 24/7 on a cloud infrastructure will cost more than your data center, by the way. And
Yes.
also end up with security problems. Because, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about security through this time, but basically in order to secure your applications in the cloud, you're going to really have to think about them differently.
Yeah, I do want to highlight that. I'm glad you raised the point. A lot of our clients seem to think that moving to the cloud will cut costs. And while we've found that companies that move to the cloud can reduce costs if they do it right, the majority of companies don't either do it right or reduce costs, and they tend to increase costs. So it helps a lot to know that's not your primary goal, because you won't be able to deliver it usually.
Which kind of comes to the second part, not to cut you off.
No, go right ahead.
Comes to the second part of the answer, which is, and this is a journey I think a lot of large enterprise companies are on, which is really a journey of modernization. There's almost no large enterprise, or even probably mid-sized enterprise, depending on how long you've been around, that didn't build their applications in the 90s or the early 2010s, and really needs to think about application re-architecture. The hard thing within a data center is to reinvent your applications within the contained footprint of the walls of the premise that you've chosen to kind of commission and manage. And it's a huge amount of engineering to introduce modern technologies, especially when those technologies like Kubernetes and platform services are fairly complicated. So the cloud really creates an opportunity for you to go greenfield and modernize that stack. And that modernization facilitates the ability to use the cloud with the elasticity and security posture that now starts to reduce those risks and give you the opportunity to optimize your financials.
I like that a lot too, because that's one of my favorite parts of application modernization, is something I call rethink. You know, Gartner has its 5 R's, and for us, rethinking is not one of the Gartner 5 R's, but it is a very important R, which is figure out whether the business process that you're trying to move to cloud even needs to get done in the first place. Because a lot of times that process was actually created because of technology limitations in the 80s or 90s, and it's obsolete, and you don't even need to do it anywhere, let alone in cloud. So the fact that it gives you that opportunity to really rethink and modernize is a good thing.
Which just triggers kind of the third part of the answer. So there's a thing I typically call cloud only. Technologies like Snowflake, which let you interact with your customers in a completely different way. And a whole new space right now around citizen development. Whether you're looking at like a Power BI or a Dynamics or a Salesforce CRM, all the software as a service platforms that let your actually end business in some case interact and get directly into their data, modern machine learning platforms, et cetera. So your point about really rethinking your business process, in many cases you will just divest legacy applications and approach problems in a brand new way because you have access to all these capabilities that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay, great. Well, now that we've talked about what some of the challenges and opportunities are with the cloud, let's take a break for a second and have a word from our sponsor.
A pause for a word from our sponsor. Verizon is proud to sponsor this episode of Executive Tech Talks on Cloud. As a provider of global network security and cloud services for mission-critical platforms and financial services, Verizon understands what it means to be systemically important. Recently, Verizon introduced the Multi-Access Edge Computing, or MEC platform, together with Verizon 5G to bring cloud computing to another level. MEC brings transactional data, AI, and other services close to the end users and applications at the network's edge. Together, these technologies help enable the real-time enterprise. Verizon looks forward to engaging with viewers on these and other topics in the near future. A quick disclaimer. This third-party advertisement does not constitute an endorsement, guarantee, warranty, or recommendation by Executive Tech Talks, Nemertes, WSTA, today's guest, or their company. We make no representations or warranties about any product or service advertised. With that, back to our show.
So, Allison, what are some constraints to consider when developing and implementing your cloud strategy?
Constraints that are very similar to the ones that you have to think about when you're developing any strategy. What's your goal? What's your budget? So are you constrained by a goal that might be driven by, again, going back to the example of a data center exit, and your contracts for your data centers are up in 2 or 3 years, and you know you've got to sweep them clean, and that's going to motivate one set of behaviors and approaches. The other thing, and this is a big one when you come back to cost, is your budget allow you time for the overlap costs? One of the biggest challenges that we see as we look is you've got to have a multi-year plan that you're very diligent about back-checking, such that when you do your business case and you say, if I run my application on-prem and it costs X, and I run it on the cloud and it costs Y, and Y could be more or less than X. But what of those happens exactly when those things overlap and I'm dealing with what, the evil bubble cost moment? And how am I going to manage my business through that? And then how am I going to discipline myself on both sides? The decommission on-prem, because we all know we're not great at turning things off, but also that, what I often call the fish growing to the size of the fishbowl. One of the biggest things that we have to be mindful of when we go into the cloud is because there's capacity on demand, people use capacity on demand. And it can trigger some lazy behaviors. It can trigger growth where your business doesn't realize that because they asked for more, and you gave it to them, now it's going to be a bigger bill at the end of the day. And you can literally show them the bill at the end of the day. So answering how do you deal with the challenge? Cost transparency, my favorite part of the cloud. We have had development teams who've resisted optimization because the business has prioritized features, show the business the net reduction they could get from an optimization, literally pick up projects they would have never done on-prem because they can see transparently immediate savings and opportunities they can use to invest in more.
Doing it wrong costs more, so you do it right.
Exactly.
Yeah. What about constraints like compliance and security? People are, in my view, a lot of times people are either over assume security on the part of the cloud provider, and they figure it's no longer their responsibility, or do the opposite and say, gee, I can't trust anything because it's in the cloud. How do you kind of square the circle around compliance and security in the cloud?
So let's take them separately, and we can start with security because that's always top of mind, and I think it's where people are front and foremost. Although I have to say compliance and governance are even harder. Security is always your responsibility. Your clients will never accept you blaming a third-party provider, even if it is an issue with the third-party provider, because it's your responsibility to monitor for their issues and have agreements that basically make them responsible for alerting you to their issues and remediating the issues using standard practices. And I have to say, looking at how the cloud environments progressed, the providers have generally really come to understand this requirement, and they're much more willing to come to the table and help. But you must secure. You must take your current bar and put it even higher. Think across the full set of prevent, detect, respond controls. You need to have playbooks that tell you that when this alert comes through, I know what I'm going to do. One of the things we implemented for certain things was in our prevent controls, we have detection with zero tolerance. And so whereas typically on-prem we would almost never automate removing something from the environment, on the cloud, both because of the nature of the automation enabling us to manage the risk. If we see something go out of compliance and it's risky, we've enforced auto remediation. And we pick that operational risk because we actually have faith that it would have either been a mistake or a malicious intent.
And even if it was legitimate code, executing, it was extremely bad process, and that developer should learn that you try to do that and it's not going to work.
Exactly. Switching to compliance and everybody, across financial services, we all have different regulators, and different regulators have different postures and different levels of learning within their own organizations. But understand what your regulators expect. Put strong governance in place. And equally, as much as you have to partner with your developers and your business, you have to partner with your compliance department, your regulatory relations areas, your audit, and your legal. These are your friends. They need to be at the table, and you're going to spend a lot of time educating them, and you will get every minute back in return when you have an educated risk community that can help you see things coming and stay connected to the ever-changing regulatory landscape.
Got it. We've talked a lot about the challenges and some of the issues. What about the benefits and outcomes that folks can see from cloud migration? How would you advise folks to measure their success? What are the things they should look at to determine whether they were successful or not?
We have so many discussions about what to measure. Time to market is one that's top of mind. How much more quickly can we deliver something to our business because we remove the white space in the life cycle of build and deploy through a combination of readily available services and automation? And it goes back to doing the cloud the right way. Because if you choose to do the cloud by a point-and-click console, you're not going to accomplish that. You really need to embrace infrastructure as code and modernize at that level.
You also talked about burst capability and the fact that the company is able to handle things that just couldn't before.
Yeah, you read my mind. One of the most difficult things, and it comes in a few form factors. So let's take one that's near and dear, COVID. If you look back to, I guess now a little over a year in March, where there was massive, unpredictable, unprecedented volumes. The fact that we had started to move some of our workloads facilitated that we could both meet the requirements for the workloads that had moved, as well as be in a position to, maybe offload a couple other things that were ready so that the workloads that weren't ready to go could. And what it really set up for us were the workloads that needed to be the most elastic, needed to be thought through as burstable or able to just migrate, so that we would be able to take advantage of that elasticity in a completely unpredicted way. The other thing it's enabled is sometimes the business wants to do something unusual. Just look through a different, and a lot of our big workloads are risk workloads, look through a different risk lens, play out a one-off, one-if scenario. And so we've been able to partner with our cloud providers to harness a volume of compute we wouldn't normally even try to ask for, to do a quick turnaround on that, and then we're done and we give it back.
Right. And so in a sense, what you're saying is really try to position your metrics around agility and the multiple axes of it. How quickly it takes to turn something up, how quickly it takes to develop a product, how quickly it takes to respond to internal customers' requirements for, say, vastly increased compute capability for short burst.
Correct.
So all of these agility functions.
And don't forget the end of the life cycle. So when my group gave me the life cycle, they said, okay, where everything's going to be in development, and then it's going to be limited availability, and then general availability. And I said, oh, and they were silent. And I said, and then it's going to go into unsupported, and then you're going to turn it off.
Right. That thing you forgot to do for stuff that was on premise, which is why we're now all doing this exercise. That thing, yes. Oh, yeah, that thing. Well, Allison, this was absolutely fantastic. Thanks for sharing your hard-earned, hard-won wisdom with folks. I hope that those of you who are watching get some sense on how to progress along this cloud journey, as they say, the cloud migration. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
You are most welcome, and thanks to our sponsors for making this possible.